Have you ever wondered if your life could change for the better, even in the midst of the hardest seasons? It's a question many of us ask when facing struggles that seem unending. But what if I told you that your breakthrough is already on the horizon? Psalm 126 shows us that no matter how much we're hurting today, God's restoration is just around the corner. In fact, He promises that your sorrow can be transformed into joy, your losses into abundance. The key to experiencing this profound shift lies in understanding the power of God's faithfulness. So let's dive into Psalm 126 and discover how your fortune can change now as you trust in God's divine restoration. When life hits you hard, it feels like there's no way out, doesn't it? But Psalm 126 speaks of a deep, soul-stirring truth. Even in the most difficult moments, God's restoration is within reach. It's like waking up from a nightmare, only to find that it was just a bad dream. The Bible shows us that, despite suffering, there is a hope and joy waiting on the other side, and it's more profound than we can imagine. Think about that for a moment. No matter how dark the path may seem, there is light at the end of it. Israel's experience in Psalm 126 serves as a powerful reminder of what God is capable of doing, even in the hardest times. It's not just a nice story in a book. It's proof that God's promise of restoration is alive. Imagine being in Israel's shoes after years of hardship, and then suddenly everything changes. The sorrow, the pain, the struggle, gone. What's left is joy, a sense of peace, and a fresh hope for the future. God didn't just lift their burdens, He transformed their entire reality. It's a message that applies to all of us, even today. Now you might be thinking that's great for them, but what about me? Well, here's the good news. God's restoration isn't just for the people of Israel. It's for you too. Just as He restored Zion, He can restore your joy, your peace, and your life. Think about areas where you've struggled. Maybe it's in your relationships, your finances, or even your own heart. This psalm reminds us that God sees our struggles, and He's actively working to turn those tears into joy. All you need to do is trust in His timing and believe that the restoration will come. Have you ever been in a place where you felt like nothing would ever get better? Psalm 126 isn't just a distant hope, it's a promise for today. This message tells us that, no matter how long the darkness lasts, joy will eventually return. It's not about ignoring the pain, but about trusting that despite what you see in front of you, God is at work behind the scenes, preparing a future filled with joy. Think of it like planting seeds. Even when the soil looks barren, the harvest is coming. In the face of tears and suffering, there's an essential step we must take: trusting God. It's not always easy, especially when life seems unbearable, but that's where faith comes in. Psalm 126 challenges us to keep going, to keep praying, and to trust that a future harvest is on its way. Just like the farmer who sows in tears, you might not see the fruits of your labor immediately, but the promise is clear: God is faithful. He will bring that harvest of joy and peace in His perfect timing. You might wonder, what does this mean for you personally? How can you actively trust God during difficult times? The answer lies in your daily prayers and the actions you take. By praying and asking God to restore what's been broken, you're engaging in the process of healing. It's about making space for God to work, even when you don't understand how or when. This process might feel slow at times, but trust that God's timing is always right. Finally, Psalm 126 teaches us an important truth. Sowing faith during hardship leads to a harvest of blessings. It's easy to lose sight of the future when you're struggling, but the message is clear. Faith, no matter how small, will bring you through. Just like a farmer waits for his crops to grow, we must wait for our harvest of joy. In the meantime, we can pray, trust, and keep believing. Keep sowing the seeds of faith because the harvest is on its way. Imagine going through the toughest season of your life, one that seems unending, where every day feels like a struggle. Now picture waking up one morning to find that everything has turned around, just like a dream coming true. That's exactly what happened to Israel, as described in Psalm 126. It wasn't just a moment of improvement, it was a complete transformation. The hardship they experienced had been so intense that the joy of their restoration felt surreal. It was almost like they couldn't believe it was real, but God's restoration is that powerful. this kind of miraculous turnaround can happen in our lives too. Think about how many times you felt stuck, like there was no way out of your situation. And yet, Psalm 126 shows us that even the most hopeless circumstances can be completely reversed. God didn't just bring Israel back from exile. He brought them back into his favor. They felt like they were dreaming because the joy of their restoration was so overwhelming. This isn't just a story for Israel. It's a promise for all of us who trust in God. It's easy to doubt in the midst of hardship. It's human nature to think that a miracle like this could never happen to you, right? But the beauty of Psalm 126 is that it teaches us the importance of believing in God's power to restore, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. Just as the people of Israel were taken by surprise when their fortunes turned around, we too can experience a restoration that feels almost too good to be true. It's about seeing beyond the present struggles and trusting that the miracle is already on its way. Think about this in a personal context. Maybe you're dealing with a broken relationship, a financial burden, or a health issue that feels like it has no solution. Psalm 126 reminds you that God has the power to turn your situation around. It's not about the circumstances. It's about what God can do through your faith. When you pray, when you stay consistent, when you trust in His timing, you're opening the door for God to work a miracle in your life. God's restoration isn't always immediate, but it is always certain. This psalm doesn't just promise a restoration of circumstances, it promises the restoration of hearts, of hope, and of joy. Just like the people of Israel, we can experience a shift from sorrow to joy, from despair to hope. It's about staying in faith, holding on to God's promises, and watching as He brings about the change we've longed for. And sometimes that shift happens so unexpectedly that it feels like a dream coming true. The power of God's restoration is something that should ignite our hearts with hope. Israel's story is more than a historical event. It's a testimony of what God can do. The joy and peace they experienced after their restoration weren't just for them. They were a witness to everyone who has ever struggled. It's a reminder that we're never too far gone for God to reach us and bring about a miracle. Even in your darkest hour, God is ready to bring a breakthrough. So what does this mean for you today? Maybe you're in the middle of a difficult season and it feels like you're never going to get through it. But take heart. Just as Israel's restoration came suddenly and powerfully, your own breakthrough can come at any moment. Trust in God's power. Keep praying and hold on to the hope that your restoration is coming. You just have to keep believing. There's a comforting truth hidden in the words of Psalm 126. The same God who restored the fortunes of Zion is the God who can restore your life. Think about that for a moment. No matter what you've lost, whether it's joy, peace, or hope, God has the power to bring it all back. It's easy to feel like your best days are behind you, but this psalm reminds us that God's restorative power isn't limited by time or circumstances. What He did for Zion, He can do for you. This is a personal promise, not just a historical account. Sometimes life knocks us down in ways we never expect. Maybe you've lost a job, gone through a painful breakup, or faced a health challenge that's shaken you to the core. It's in these moments that we need to remember the promise of restoration. The people of Israel experienced a miraculous turnaround. God didn't just restore their physical land, He restored their joy. And He can do the same for you. That lost joy, that feeling of being disconnected from your true self, can be brought back to life with God's help. It might seem impossible to imagine joy returning when you're stuck in a season of hardship. But Psalm 126 teaches us that what may seem impossible is actually within God's power. When the Israelites thought they were beyond hope, God brought them out of despair and filled their hearts with joy. The same can happen for you. It's about recognizing that, no matter how dark things seem, God is faithful to restore, not just your circumstances, but your heart. He is the ultimate source of joy, and He can reignite that joy in your life. Think about your own situation. Are you waiting for God to restore something in your life? Maybe you've been praying for peace in your home, for healing in your body, or for joy in your spirit. Psalm 126 calls us to believe that God can bring that restoration, even when it feels out of reach. He's done it before, and He's not done working yet. So, Keep your eyes fixed on Him and trust that your breakthrough is coming. Your restoration is closer than you think. The restoration God offers isn't just about returning things to the way they were, it's about transforming your life into something new. When God restores, He doesn't just give you back what was lost, He makes it even better. Think of it as an upgrade. The joy He gives after a season of suffering is deeper, more profound, and more lasting than the joy you had before. God's restoration is not temporary, it's eternal, and it lasts far beyond the circumstances that caused the sorrow in the first place. Here's the key. You don't have to do this alone. The Israelites didn't have to restore themselves. They called on God, and He answered. You can do the same. When you pray, when you trust, when you allow God to work in your life, you're opening the door for restoration. You might not see it immediately, but believe that God is working behind the scenes to restore everything that was lost. Your life isn't over just because you're going through a tough time. In fact, your restoration could be just around the corner. Finally, Psalm 126 reminds us that God's restoration is a sign of His faithfulness. When we look back at our lives and see the moments where God brought us through, it's a testimony of His love and power. Just as God restored Israel, He will restore you. Whatever it is that you've lost, whether it's joy, peace, or hope, remember that God is faithful to bring it back. Trust in His timing and watch as He turns your sorrow into joy. It's often said that our darkest hours are when we need God the most. And Psalm 126 highlights just how powerful trust in God can be, especially during times of sorrow and suffering. The people of Israel were in a season of deep pain, yet they still believed in the possibility of a better future. They trusted that even though they were weeping in the moment, there was a future harvest of joy waiting for them. This teaches us an essential truth. Even in our hardest times, God is working for our good. The tears we shed today are not without purpose. Now, it's easy to say we trust God when everything is going well, but the real test of our faith comes when we're facing trials. Have you ever found yourself in a season where everything felt like it was falling apart? Maybe you prayed, but it felt like your prayers were unanswered. Psalm 126 speaks to that place of struggle. It's in these times that trusting God becomes not just an act of faith, but a declaration of hope. You may be crying today, but God is using those tears to sow seeds for tomorrow's joy. The future harvest is real, and it's waiting for you. In moments of hardship, it's easy to wonder where God is, or whether He's even listening to our prayers. But Psalm 126 calls us to believe that even when we're in the midst of suffering, God is near. Your tears are not unnoticed. They are a part of God's divine plan, a plan that will lead you to a place of greater joy and restoration. Trusting God in these moments isn't easy, but it's in these very moments that God shows His faithfulness in the most profound ways. Think of a time in your life when you felt you were sowing in tears, whether it was in your career, relationships, or health. Did it seem like your efforts were in vain? Were you questioning whether it would ever get better? Psalm 126 is a reminder that God sees our struggles and He is preparing us for something greater. Our pain is never wasted in His hands. Just as the Israelites were restored, your pain is leading to a future harvest of joy, provision, and peace. Hold on to that truth and keep moving forward in faith. The beauty of this psalm lies in its message that the process of sowing in tears is not the end of the story. It's a temporary season that leads to an eternal reward. You may be walking through a valley right now, but God is leading you toward the mountaintop. As you continue to trust Him, even in the hardest times, you're planting the seeds of your future joy. This isn't just about surviving the storm. It's about knowing that God is using the storm to prepare you for something incredible. Now let's make this practical. When you're facing tough times, what can you do to hold on to this hope? First, keep praying. When life gets heavy, pray even more. And don't just pray for God to take away the pain. Pray for strength, for patience, and for the ability to see beyond the immediate suffering. Also, surround yourself with a community of people who can encourage you and remind you of God's promises. Just as the Israelites had their community, you too can lean on those who walk alongside you in faith. Trusting God during tears is a challenge, but it's also a choice. It's a decision to believe that the pain of today is temporary and that joy will come in the morning. Psalm 126 doesn't just speak to the sorrow. It speaks to the joy that follows. So keep your eyes on the prize and trust that God is with you through it all. Your harvest of joy is coming. Psalm 126 isn't just a reflection of past restoration. It's also a heartfelt prayer for ongoing renewal. The Israelites were looking to God not only for what he had done, but for what he would continue to do. In their plea, they acknowledged God's faithfulness and asked him to keep restoring their lives, hearts, homes, and families. And this is where we can relate to the psalm today. We too need to pray for God's continued restoration, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of those around us. The prayer for restoration is an act of trust in God's power and a declaration of our dependence on his unwavering faithfulness. When you face hardship, it's easy to forget that God is still working, even when you don't see immediate results. Psalm 126 prayer is a reminder that we can ask God to continue the work of restoration. It's not a one-time event, but a process that unfolds over time. Whether it's physical healing, emotional recovery, or the restoration of broken relationships, this prayer invites us to ask God for his continued intervention. It calls us to remember that restoration isn't a temporary fix. It's an ongoing process where God works daily in our lives, renewing and transforming us. Think about it. How often do we focus on the blessings that have already come and forget to ask for more? Psalm 126 teaches us that it's okay to keep seeking God's restorative work. We don't need to wait until we're completely healed or restored before asking God to continue working in our lives. Restoration is a journey, and in every season, we can pray for God's continued touch. He doesn't just restore once, he continues to renew, refresh, and rebuild us, sometimes in ways we don't even realize. In the same way that the Israelites prayed for their nation's restoration, we can pray for the restoration of our families and communities. It's a reminder that restoration isn't only personal, it's communal. When we pray for God's work to continue, we should think about those around us too. Our families, friends, and neighbors also need God's touch. Families, for example, can face challenges that seem insurmountable, but through prayer, we invite God into those situations, asking for his help in restoring broken relationships and bringing peace to homes. A powerful way to live out this prayer is to make it a daily part of your spiritual practice. Don't wait until things fall apart before you pray for restoration. Make it a habit to pray for God's continued work of healing and renewal. Ask God to restore your heart when it feels heavy, to renew your hope when it seems lost, and to bring peace into your home when chaos threatens. The psalm encourages us to keep praying, trusting that God's faithfulness will never fail us. What does it mean to pray for restoration in your life? It means inviting God to keep working in you, your loved ones, and your community. It means acknowledging that God's faithfulness is unending and that he desires to see us whole, healed, and restored. You don't need to have it all figured out. Just trust that God's restorative power is at work, always. And just like the Israelites, you can trust that God will hear your plea and answer in his perfect timing. Remember, the prayer for continued restoration is one of hope. It reminds us that no matter what stage of life we're in, God's faithfulness is unshakable. The restoration he begins is one that he will continue. He doesn't leave us halfway through the process. Keep praying, keep trusting, and watch as God continues to work in your life, bringing about transformation and healing, step by step. One of the most powerful truths in Psalm 126 is that it reminds us of God's faithfulness, especially during difficult times. When everything seems to be falling apart and the weight of life feels unbearable, this psalm reassures us that God is still at work. He doesn't abandon his people, even when the storm rages. Instead, he uses those very storms to show his power to transform any situation. Through the lens of Psalm 126, we see that God's faithfulness is not just a comforting thought, it's a foundational truth that we can rely on, no matter the circumstances. It's easy to believe in God's provision when things are going well, but true faith is demonstrated when we continue to trust God in the midst of hardship. Just like the Israelites, we might find ourselves in situations that seem impossible. But this psalm shows us that God can bring healing to broken hearts, provision in times of need, and peace in moments of chaos. It doesn't matter how impossible a situation may seem, God has the power to transform it. The message of Psalm 126 is not just about deliverance, it's about restoration. God can take any mess and turn it into a message of hope. In real life, this can look like many things. Perhaps you're dealing with a health crisis, a financial struggle, or a relationship that seems beyond repair. Psalm 126 offers hope, reminding you that God can bring healing where there is sickness, provision where there is lack, and peace where there is turmoil. Maybe it's not happening immediately, but God's faithfulness assures you that transformation is on the way. Like the Israelites who endured a period of sorrow, you too can experience restoration. It's a promise from God that He will never leave you or forsake you, even in the most challenging times. Take a moment to reflect on a situation in your own life where you felt overwhelmed. Have you seen God show up in unexpected ways? Psalm 126 encourages us to keep our eyes open for God's transformative work. Healing doesn't always look the way we expect, and provision doesn't always come in the form we imagine. But God is faithful, and His ability to bring peace and restore what has been lost is limitless. Whether it's through a friend, a new opportunity, or an unexpected breakthrough, God has a way of working that brings healing and restoration when we least expect it. God doesn't just offer temporary solutions to our problems. He offers lasting transformation. That's the beauty of Psalm 126. It's not just about getting through the tough times, but about coming out on the other side better, stronger, and more deeply connected to God. The transformation God promises isn't just external, it's internal. It's the healing of your heart, the restoration of your soul, and the peace that transcends understanding. In times of distress, you can find comfort in knowing that God is at work, bringing about transformation in His perfect way and timing. The psalm also challenges us to look at our own role in this process of transformation. Are we willing to trust God even when things are tough? Are we ready to surrender our situations to Him and allow Him to do the work? The transformation that Psalm 126 speaks of isn't something we can control. It's something God does in His own way, and it requires our willingness to trust Him. By surrendering our fears and anxieties, we open ourselves to God's transformative power, knowing that His faithfulness will never fail. Transformation takes time, and the journey isn't always easy, but Psalm 126 encourages us to keep moving forward in faith. Even when the road is tough, remember that God's faithfulness is an anchor. He is working behind the scenes, bringing healing, provision, and peace. Keep trusting, keep praying, and know that the restoration He promises will come. It's not just a matter of survival, it's a promise of transformation. Psalm 126 offers a profound truth that's easy to overlook. Even in times of hardship, we are called to sow faith. This isn't just about surviving tough times, it's about actively choosing to believe in God's promises, even when we can't see the end result. The psalm talks about sowing seeds in tears, but reaping a joyful harvest. This powerful imagery reminds us that the act of faith, even in moments of sorrow or struggle, plants the seeds for an abundant future. When you're going through tough times, it can feel like you're investing in something that won't pay off. But Psalm 126 teaches us that the seeds of faith we sow today will grow into blessings tomorrow. Think about it. Faith isn't just a passive belief. It's an active decision to trust in God's goodness, even when things are difficult. It's like planting a seed in the soil. You don't immediately see the growth, but you know that something is happening beneath the surface. In the same way, when you sow faith through prayer, trust, and obedience during hard times, you may not see the results right away. However, God promises an abundant harvest of blessings in the future. That means the tears you shed today are not in vain. They're preparing the ground for future joy and prosperity. One practical way to sow faith in hardship is by choosing gratitude even in the midst of struggle. It may sound counterintuitive, but thankfulness can change your perspective and deepen your faith. In difficult times, you might want to ask yourself, what can I be thankful for today? This practice helps you focus on God's faithfulness, reminding you that He is still at work, even when life is tough. Gratitude isn't about ignoring the difficulties. It's about acknowledging God's presence in the midst of them. When you do this, you're planting seeds of faith that will bear fruit in the future. Another way to sow faith during hard times is by continuing to serve others. When you're struggling, the last thing you may feel like doing is giving. But serving others in their own struggles can be a powerful act of faith. It's a reminder that God's blessings aren't just for us. They're meant to flow through us to others. When you choose to help someone, even when you're in need, you're actively participating in God's plan to bless and restore. And like the farmer who plants seeds, you may not see the results immediately. But God sees your faith, and He promises an abundant harvest in due time. Psalm 126 also teaches us that the harvest of blessings is not just material, it's spiritual as well. When you sow faith, you're also sowing seeds of peace, joy, and deeper connection with God. This spiritual harvest is just as valuable, if not more so, than any material blessings that may come your way. It's a reminder that God's economy operates differently from the world's. While the world may promise quick rewards, God promises a lasting, eternal harvest that transcends circumstances. When we sow faith, we open the door for both earthly and heavenly rewards. And as we sow faith, we must remember that God is the one who makes the harvest grow. Our job is to plant the seeds, but it's God who provides the increase. This should fill us with peace, knowing that we are not alone in the process. God's faithfulness will bring the harvest. The seeds we plant today, through prayer, trust, gratitude, and service, are not just for us. They're part of a bigger plan that God is orchestrating, and He will bring about the results in His perfect timing. Sowing faith in hardship requires patience. It's easy to feel discouraged when you don't see immediate results. But Psalm 126 reminds us that the harvest is coming. Even in seasons of sorrow, the seeds you plant in faith today will yield a joyful harvest tomorrow. So keep trusting, keep sowing, and don't grow weary. God's promise is true. He will bring the harvest, and it will be far greater than what you could ever imagine. One of the most powerful aspects of Psalm 126 is the way it brings people together in shared experiences of faith and restoration. It's not just about individual transformation. It's about the collective experience of God's faithfulness. The psalm speaks to the power of community, showing us that when God restores one person, it's a testimony that encourages others. That's why it's so important for people to connect with one another during times of hardship. The video encourages viewers to reach out, share their stories, and be part of a community of faith. When we share our experiences of faith, we become a living testimony to the goodness of God. Sometimes it can be difficult to open up about struggles. We might feel alone or misunderstood. But when we connect with others who are walking a similar path, we discover that we're not as alone as we thought. The video invites viewers to share their own stories of restoration, whether it's a healing miracle, a financial breakthrough, or a moment when they experienced God's peace in a chaotic situation. Sharing these experiences not only encourages others but also strengthens our own faith. When we speak of God's faithfulness, it reaffirms His work in our lives, reminding us that He is always present, even when we don't see it. This idea of community extends beyond just sharing stories. It's about being there for one another. In times of hardship, we can be the hands and feet of God for each other. The video encourages viewers to not only speak about their experiences, but also to actively engage with others. Whether it's offering a word of encouragement, praying together, or simply listening to someone's struggles, we are called to support each other in the journey of faith. This builds a community where God's restoration can flow freely, bringing healing and peace to those who need it most. For example, imagine a person who has just gone through a difficult season and experienced the restoration promised in Psalm 26. They share their story in the comments, and it sparks a conversation with someone who's currently facing a similar struggle. By engaging with this person, offering support, and sharing insights, they both feel encouraged. Not only does it strengthen their own faith, but it also creates a ripple effect of hope. This is the beauty of community in the body of Christ. We're not meant to go through hardships alone. The psalm encourages us to lean on one another, to share in each other's joys and sorrows, and to trust that God will use our stories to uplift and restore. The video also emphasizes the importance of hearing other people's stories. Sometimes, hearing about how God has restored someone else can give us the courage to believe that He can do the same for us. It's like a chain of hope. One person's testimony becomes another's reason to believe. That's why the invitation to share and connect is so vital. We never know who might be struggling, waiting for a word of encouragement, or seeking a sign of hope. Our willingness to open up and share our experiences of God's faithfulness could be the very thing that helps someone else take that next step in their own faith journey. As the community grows, so does the power of collective faith. When people come together with the same purpose, believing in God's restoration and sharing their stories, something remarkable happens. The atmosphere becomes charged with hope, and that energy can lead to even greater experiences of faith. God uses our collective stories to build His kingdom, and every person's testimony is a valuable part of that process. By participating in the community, we each play a role in creating an environment where faith can thrive. So, the invitation to connect and share isn't just about building a community. It's about fostering a culture of restoration. As people share their experiences, they're not only encouraging others, but also strengthening their own faith. It's a reminder that we're all in this together, and God's faithfulness is something we can celebrate as a community. By opening up and inviting others to do the same, we create a space where healing, restoration, and transformation can happen, not just individually, but collectively. One of the most powerful messages in Psalm 126 is that, even in the darkest seasons of life, God is faithful. The psalm speaks of the people of Israel, who, after experiencing deep sorrow and exile, found themselves restored to a place of joy and peace. It's a beautiful reminder that no matter how difficult the circumstances may seem, God is always at work behind the scenes. He can transform any situation, no matter how bleak, into something that reflects His goodness. This truth isn't just a distant promise, it's something that's available to us right now. God's faithfulness is not just a concept, it's a reality that can change our lives. When we face challenges, it's easy to feel as though we're abandoned or forgotten. But Psalm 126 teaches us that even in times of suffering, God is still present, working to bring healing, provision, and peace. It may not always be immediately obvious, but God is always moving on our behalf. Perhaps you're in a season of uncertainty right now, wondering if things will ever get better. The psalm reminds us that, just as God restored the people of Israel, He is more than capable of restoring our lives, bringing us back to a place of joy and peace. This truth isn't just theoretical, it's something we can actively engage with through prayer. When we pray, we align ourselves with God's will and invite His transformation into our lives. It's through prayer that we tap into God's power to heal emotional wounds, provide for our needs, and bring peace to our hearts. Psalm 126 shows us that God's faithfulness isn't limited by our circumstances. Even when we're in the depths of despair, He is working behind the scenes, preparing to bring about a restoration that's beyond our understanding. And this restoration isn't just about our external circumstances. It's about our hearts and spirits too. One of the most powerful aspects of God's faithfulness is that it doesn't depend on us. It's not about what we can do or how well we perform. It's about God's unwavering love and commitment to us. This truth can bring great peace, knowing that we don't have to earn God's faithfulness. He is always ready to restore us, no matter where we are in life. So, even in difficult times, we can rest assured that God is faithful. He will bring us through the storm, just as He did for Israel. And when the storm is over, we'll find ourselves standing in a place of peace and restoration. Let's not forget that God's transformation isn't always immediate. Just like the people of Israel who had to wait for their restoration, we may need to exercise patience in our own lives. But the promise remains: God will bring about a restoration that will be worth the wait. We may not see the full picture right now, but we can trust that God's timing is perfect. His restoration is not just about solving our problems, it's about shaping us into the people He has created us to be. When we trust in His faithfulness, we open ourselves to the transformation that will bring lasting healing and peace. This message of transformation is not just for individual believers. It's a message for communities as well. When we face trials together, we can support one another and remind each other of God's faithfulness. Just as God restored Israel, He can restore our communities, bringing healing, provision, and peace to families, neighborhoods, and nations. Psalm 126 shows us that when we trust in God's faithfulness, the transformation is not just personal, it's collective. Together, we can experience God's restoration in powerful ways. As you reflect on Psalm 126, remember that God's faithfulness is not just a promise, it's a reality that can transform every aspect of your life. Whether you're facing personal challenges or walking through a difficult season as a community, God is always at work, bringing healing, provision, and peace. Trust in His faithfulness and know that, like the people of Israel, you too will experience the restoration that only God can provide. As you reflect on Psalm 126 and the incredible promise of restoration, ask yourself, what areas of your life need God's transformation today? What is holding you back from trusting Him fully with your situation? Know that God is faithful, and He can bring healing, provision, and peace to any circumstance. It's time to take a step of faith, sow seeds of hope, and trust that the harvest of joy and restoration is coming. If this message has inspired you, don't forget to share your story with others and connect with the community. And for more powerful insights on how God is transforming lives, make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Let's keep growing in faith together.